Yo.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to Certified Life Coach Institute, CLCI Live.
All right, we are live. And we're talking about stuff today. Important stuff.
Yes,
But before we get started with this stuff, and to all our future students, hello, it's nice to see you. This video will be used in our curriculum. So, before we begin, please comment. And for those who are watching this live, or those who are watching it on YouTube, either way, or on Facebook later, we want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. We will do our best to answer them live or afterwards. And also make sure you smash that subscribe button, that like, that follow. Do it. It's the only way we know you enjoy what we are doing and that this content that we are putting out is meaningful for you. And after that, I'm going to hand it over to some other folks so that they are able to talk about what we are talking about today. And if I take a bite of coleslaw, I'm sorry.
So this is CLCI Live. Some of you might be watching this for the first time because of your 102 class. Part of the curriculum requires that you watch videos on the core competencies, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The ICF has updated their core competencies as of, I believe it was last year. I believe so. They've updated them, and we're going to be covering the foundation, and number 1, demonstrate ethical practice, and number 2, embodying a coaching mindset. So
Beautiful.
Lot to talk about here.
A whole lot.
Let's get started.
And that's what we'll be. We're going to try our best to be mindful of time. I just sort of want to outline a structure for how we are going to discuss each of these core competencies. Each core competency is nestled under an overarching, I guess, theme is what you would call it. And so these, as Anthony mentioned, would be foundation. And within that, we talk about our primary core competency, and underneath each core competency, there are several sub competencies. So we're going to go through those sub competencies, and I would like for us to keep in mind as we do this, what does this look like in your practice, and what might it also look like when it is not in your practice, when it's lacking in your practice? So these are the questions I really want us to answer. And then at the end, I want us to briefly discuss if these core competencies change as we move from ACC, PCC, or MCC. And what I mean by that is if they change in the way they show up in your practice. I will say that today's core competencies, don't think they have any variation from ACC to PCC to MCC. So that'll be something we get into more when we get into your core competencies. So Anthony, you briefly mentioned it, demonstrates an ethical practice. I think we have a fantastic caption for that here with the definition underneath: understands and consistently applies coaching ethics and standards of coaching. So just off the right now, before we move on to those bullet points that it comes with, what does that mean to you guys, you all?
I think just oh, go ahead.
I was about to say, it means that there is a actual guideline of coaching that you need to follow as an ICF professional. It's not the Wild West of coaching. There are rules and standards that you have to follow and keep following consistently throughout your whole coaching career. That's the general basis. We'll get into what those standards are in a little bit, but that's what I get from it.
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, to that point, I've always said in classes, there's a difference between a coaching conversation that you have as an ICF professional, an arbitrary conversation you have with a friend, and a coaching session where otherwise your only concern is, am I helping my client or am I helping my customer? This gives you a guideline that keeps you in line with what the ICF calls coaching. That way, if for whatever reason the conversation goes left, right, or whatever direction, you have something to fall back on and the coaching session doesn't descend into chaos, if you will.
And this ethical practice is going to be defined in what that breakdown is going to be. The idea of maintaining that standard throughout every coaching experience you have is going to be a really utmost important part of this, especially as we're going through 1 and 2, the foundation discussion today. Take note, think about applying these skills. How would you apply these skills? And even consider where you've made the mistake and how you can adjust that mistake to meet these standards.
So I think from that, again, we mentioned that there is an actual code of ethics. Big note on that. We have a video we did earlier this year about the ICF code of ethics, where we did a very deep dive into that code of ethics. So after you are done watching this video, if you want to familiarize yourself with the code of ethics, you can not only go to CLCI's or find that video on our live, you can also go to ICF's website and access that code of ethics. They have them available to you anywhere and anytime. I'm also dropping the website for the core competencies into our chat right now. So if anybody wants to follow along, you are 100% welcome to do so. So let's move on to that first bullet point, shall we? Our first bullet point underneath this is as follows. Demonstrates personal integrity and honesty in interactions with clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders.
Seems pretty self-explanatory. Don't lie to people. Don't do like a bait and switch. Don't break your contracts with people.
Don't embellish things
Don't
that
embellish.
are not. Yeah.
Don't overpromise results.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's a big one.
And just to put a little definition on, we kind of know what clients and relevant stakeholders are. I guess relevant stakeholders would be anybody who's involved in the coaching session, but sponsors, those are the people who pay for the coaching session. So your sponsor might be the client, in which case there's not really a sponsor role. Other times you have an organization who is paying for coaching to be done, and you are doing business directly with the sponsor, and then you'll be coaching their clients. So.
And it definitely gets a little confusing in those spaces, and I think it's something we'll probably dive a little deeper into with regard to who am I responsible for, what am I, or who am I speaking to? Who am I responsible to, I guess, maintaining that agreement with? And when you have a sponsor, you're going to have a contract that details out all of those things with the sponsor and in addition with the client as well. So there's going to be more than one contract, and all of those details should be ironed out within that contract so that there aren't these big questions once the coaching begins, that it's all sort of explained prior to. The other piece I wanted to quickly tap into that you mentioned, Anthony, and this was one of the examples given in the ICF videos. They have a short 10-minute video on this. And that is that maintaining contracts is part of this integrity and acting with integrity. So if you're somebody that sets an appointment with your client for 1 p.m. and you are showing up at 1:10 p.m. as the coach each time, I would say that there is a lack of integrity happening in there and a lack of honesty happening there. And it's also it also is not respecting your client's time and what you agreed to within the contract. So it can get down to as little details as that when we are talking about this concept of integrity and honesty.
When we're looking at even coaching evaluations of a coaching session, if you don't demonstrate ethical practices, you will fail. Because it counts for every part of the competency. So you must follow these rules with high standards and meet your contracts. Yeah,
it also sets the tone for the entire coaching session and relationship. So if number one is not there, probably the rest of the core competencies are not going to be, apparent. Should we move on to number 2?
Let's do it. I will get it up in 1 second. You asked me at the worst time.
I have these locked and loaded. We got to get through them soon.
I've got it up.
I can
Thank
read
you.
So we've got is sensitive to client's identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs.
It's got to be client-centric. It's got to be about the client. It's got to be awareness of who they are, and your representation is centered around who they are.
I think this is one of the things that separates coaching from so many other conversations too, because think of conversations with other professionals, not to say that they're better or worse than coaching. That's a completely separate conversation to be had. But when someone comes in with a problem, what's the listener focused on? Solving the problem. Oh, you have this relationship issue, you have this career issue. Here, let me give you advice and send you about your way. But being sensitive to the client's identity makes you look at them beyond just the problem they're bringing to you. So if you can just, at the very least, don't let your client be personally identified with their problem, then you'll be much more sensitive to their identity, environment, experiences, and everything else that's exacerbating the goal or the problem.
So I had a question in this space, and it kind of came up in the second video that the ICF did on the next core competency, but they both overlap with one another, and this definitely overlaps with this. And it is sensitive to clients' identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs. I guess we're not diving as deep into culture, and so that's where the next one comes in. But this is kind of, it falls, I think, in that space. There was an example given of a Muslim client and the coach having her dog present in a one-on-one environment. And I was not aware that for Muslims, dogs are, it's something that they don't necessarily want to be around. And I can't say every Muslim, but I'm sure is a group. And so it could be seen as very disrespectful to have your animal present, your dog present in that coaching situation. So my question is, how do I handle that as a coach? How much research am I bound to do? How do I research? What do I have to do?
Yeah. So in the very beginning, during consultations and however many initial conversations you have, even before they hire you, you're, yes, doing research on them. You're asking them questions. I find that one of the quickest ways to learn about my clients' preferences and pet peeves is to just ask, hey, is there anything I need to know about you? That way I show up correctly in the coaching sessions and I don't inadvertently offend you, cause you harm. Because even though the question itself might sound silly, like, why the heck wouldn't you ask that question? Imagine 3-4 sessions in, you haven't asked that question and you do something and nobody knew, and you didn't know that that was offensive to the client. Now there's a fracture of trust because you didn't do your due diligence in the beginning to ask, hey, what do I need to know about you? And it's okay if the client doesn't know in that moment, but if something does happen later on, just because you asked that question in the beginning, there's more grace to be extended there. So asking them up front.
I can certainly understand how that may or may not come up, what I practice privately. And the idea of this is I have to share what my format is. If I'm comfortable bringing my dog to work with me and we're doing it in person, I need to share that before they come in. Hey, this is what typically happens. I'm just checking in with you to make sure you're comfortable with that. And just share with them what your procedures are, who you are in that coaching session and what comes along with you in that session. A lot of us are now virtual. We have dogs barking in the background, right? Oh, I do. And I would probably start off a session with someone, I have dogs. I apologize. I'm going to mute myself. Should I hear them barking? But I'm still fully focused in on what you're saying. So setting those boundaries and expectations can go a long way.
I think a big piece of this too, though, is to talk to your client, like communicate the stuff, because what came forward for me is we can do all the research in the world, but we don't know how our client, they may label themselves as one thing or another, but we don't know what that means for our client and how that shows up for a client in their life and in their expectation. So having this open and honest discussion, and I think maintaining that level of openness and honesty throughout your coaching relationship is critical. So you can do all the research in the world, but I think the next best thing is to also speak to your client, if not like the best thing. So very, very critical. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? We feeling like we're comfortable with that? Any other questions here?
No.
I think kind of 3 goes into similar what we were speaking about.
So uses language appropriate and respectful to clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders. I mean, a lot of us come from professional backgrounds. Some coaches, this might be your first professional job. It seems pretty self-explanatory to me, but don't curse in front of your clients. Understand that if you're an ICF professional, some of your sessions may be recorded for the mentor coach and for the ICF performance evaluation.
Mind you, though, I have seen coaches that their part of their marketing is that they curse. That's who they are. They're raw. They're off the cuff. They're, you know what I mean? But they're establishing that prior to the client getting there, right? So I think that while you're correct, Anthony, in probably most situations, what we want to the appropriate, respectful to client, sponsors, and relevant. Each one of those may be treated slightly different. That language might change, probably should change from clients to sponsors to relevant stakeholders.
The relevant stakeholders, though, as I was saying, could include people that are not in your current session but may listen to your recordings in the future, who also might be in charge of whether or not you get a passing evaluation or not. So not saying that, don't fully censor yourself, but keep in mind, you and your client might not be the only people who are listening and responding to your coaching session.
I think it's more if the client is using, when you're getting evaluated, the client uses those terms, swear words, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to evaluate that. But if you out of the blue just start cussing, that's not going to be looked at well, because are you really speaking the client's language, or are you speaking your language?
Mm-hmm. I like Sam's face. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's hop on to the next one, shall we? The next would be abides by ICF Code of Ethics and upholds core values. We have a video on that. You should go check it out.
Yeah. I think if we're looking at care, concern, centering around the client's beliefs and sensitivity, that empathy kind of speaks for itself in these ethics and core values of who they are.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest things about the ICF Code of Ethics is if there are any questions coaches have on whether or not something's appropriate, the ICF Code of Ethics tends to answer a lot of that. For example, should I take on a partner as a client? Well, if you look at ICF Code of Ethics, I believe it's number 24, it's pretty explicit about making sure that you're mindful of the relationship you have with clients. And if you've got that pre-established romantic relationship with someone, does serving the interest of the client also serve the interest of the partner, or vice versa? It's just, take a look at the ethics, y'all.
Mind you, we might ninja coach our partners on occasion.
What you talking about?
And most of them get pretty smart about it, though, and go, don't do that to me.
Consider what we're coaching is the who in this space. We're coaching the who and who they are, what they represent, and those values that they're bringing to the table.
And then also ICF's general code of values. I think one of my favorite parts of their code of values is not that we aren't bound by do no harm or core values. We are actually required to do better to to create improvement, not just do no harm. It's a step above that, and it's one of my favorite things.
Just quickly to iterate, the core values are professionalism, collaboration, humanity, and equity. It's probably like a 4 or 5 page document that goes over the core values. You can search it, ICF core values, but those are the basics of it as well.
And let's move on to our next one. We have 3 more to cover before we move on to the next ethic, our next core competency. So 3 more sub-competencies here. So maintains confidentiality with client information per stakeholder agreements and pertinent laws. So really straightforward, but we get a lot of questions in this space. People want us to know how long, to the secondary part too. How long do I have to hold on to client information for? Am I bound by a 7-year rule or a 3-year rule or when it comes to laws? And we're not. We are not bound to having to hold on to anything for any amount of time. That is up to you. But that maintains confidentiality piece is important. And there are times where it gets a little unclear. And we've definitely covered this a bit in that video with the ethics, where we start to talk about this piece when we're mentioning sponsors and stakeholders, and how do you maintain confidentiality with a sponsor when there's sponsors and stakeholders and other things like that involved. If you are coaching a child, somebody who is 16 maybe, and their parents have hired you to do so, do I have to maintain that 16-year-old's confidentiality if the parent is asking me questions?
You know what's a great answer to that? It's in your coaching agreement. Whatever it is agreed upon in the coaching agreement, that's what's confidential and that's what's not. So, for example, we have our own, when we do our staff student coaching, we lay out what is not considered confidential information. For example, you don't have to include it in yours, but it might be a good idea. Information that the coach had prior to coaching. That's one. Information that is generally known to the public or in the sponsor's industry. Information obtained by the coach from a third party, not the sponsor, without a breach of any obligation to the client. And we have more and more. Another one that's important. Information that involves illegal or criminal activity as defined by the law.
Yes.
That's not confidential. And we say that in our agreement that that's not confidential.
And hence the pertinent laws here as well.
So if you're coaching someone who's maybe a teenager, maybe they're an at-risk youth or something like that, maybe include something that you are not considering confidential information, things that are of imminent or likely risk or danger or harm to the client or others. That's not protected. That's not confidential. You will inform the parents or whoever if you feel like someone's going to be harmed. That wouldn't be considered confidential.
And we want to make sure that everybody knows that ahead of time. Another less controversial piece in this is that when we are coaching with our mentors, we have a clause within our contract that says we will be sharing these coaching sessions with our mentor coach and with ICF. So, and we also ask for our clients' consent on camera to do that as well, or on recording to do that as well. Typically only using their first name. So that is all communicated prior to, not only in the contract, but also there's a verbal confirmation in that recording in which when we are sharing that information. And that's just a very important thing to do, is to get that consent of sharing or sharing what is typically a confidential space. I have heard of coaches getting subpoenaed in various cases, whether they be divorce and things like that. And of course, always be honest. But you can also say, I need to maintain my client's confidentiality. So.
Realize as well, this is not a protected profession, which kind of leads into number 6, which is maintaining the distinctions between coaching, consulting, psychotherapy, and other supported professions. You do not have the same legal protections as a therapist does when it comes to confidential information. If a judge wants to know your notes or what was talked about in a coaching session, it's not legally protected. So just keep that in mind. But getting into what is the difference between coaching, consulting, psychotherapy, etc., make that known before you start coaching what coaching is, because a lot of potential clients aren't exactly as familiar as the coaches are with the differences.
Even putting that so much into your contract so that they're clearly reading it as well as your discussion of it.
I know Sam goes into this heavily when he teaches 101. Having that discussion with your client about what coaching is and what it is not is critical. And the more they understand that up front, the less hiccups along the way, ideally.
Yeah, it's service-based, because just having that conversation stops the benign conversations like, wait, I thought I was coming to you for advice, and oh, I thought I was going to be talking about my childhood trauma from 20 years ago. Like, if you're upfront with that and your client isn't sure, but I want to talk about this, I want to go here, you're not obligated to take them on. I think all of this comes down to foundation, does it not? That's what we talk about? Yeah, that's what we talk about.
Foundation. And let's talk about our final one here. Refers clients to other support professionals as appropriate. Dovetailed beautifully into that.
So we cover this in Coaching 101, but it's also important. The ICF has a PDF. I can't remember exactly what it's called.
Referring a client, I believe, I'll pull it up and drop it into the.
But essentially, it's up to you as the coach to actually know the difference between consulting, psychotherapy, a therapist, or any other sort of mental health services. And if something comes up that you're not comfortable with and you are clearly not, I guess, certified to give like therapeutic services, you have the resources to refer the person out to the services they need.